I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You're there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here, and this is Trish Wood is Critical, as you well know, because you've shown up yet again to listen to our podcast on critical thinking. And wow, is this ever a time we need to be thinking critically? Holy smokes. As I'm speaking today on Friday, the same day the show drops, we are looking at some pretty significant wildfires. It's the 18th today, by the way. Some pretty significant wildfires burning in Kelowna, which is an old stomping ground of mine. As someone who grew up in BC, I had relatives there, and my sister and her husband lived there, and we used to spend summers up near Vernon and on Lake Okanagan. So the pictures look very, very dire, and we certainly need to get to the bottom of what's going on. I believe there is also something going on in the Northwest Territories, maybe not as big as what seems to be happening in Kelowna, but yeah, we got to figure out what it is. Obviously, people are going to jump on the bandwagon and say it's climate change, but it never turns out to be that. There's always another reason, bad forest management, or like in Maui, which we're actually going to do an item on today with one of the top people from the Maui Times newspaper. Some of the stuff that happened in Lahaina, that beautiful city that burned to the ground, had to do with incompetence. They didn't turn the sirens on. The water people wouldn't deliver water to put the fire out. And all hell broke loose. And it could have been caused, I'm saying this today, but we don't know with any finality, by a failing power line infrastructure, and that it was power lines that caused it with this wind whipping it up. So, it's dangerous to call everything climate change, because if it's not climate change and it's something that we can fix immediately, we should be doing that. And my fear is that they are loving these incidents of wildfire and big storm and things that many of them are things that would be happening anyway, but they get to blame it on climate change, and it means they don't have to look at the dumb stuff they're doing that might have caused it in the first place. This is why ideology is a problem. I'm perfectly willing to accept that these fires are caused by climate change if they can prove to me they were, with data and calm, rational thinking. But they don't do that. They just say, oh, it's climate change. And if you say, well, show me, they say, you're a climate denier. So we live in very strange times, and it's so hard to get to the truth, which I know is why you listen to this podcast, because we do shovel through a lot of stuff here, trying to get to what is logical, what is the most reasonable explanation. Why are we doing all these crazy things when simple logic would say to do something else, like vaccine mandates? So we will have later on in the show one of the editors from the Maui Times out, I believe, out of Lahaina. And one of the things I want to do, obviously, first of all, with this person whose name is Darius Hurst, is just find out what's happening on the ground there. What is the devastation? How many people? What's the update? And I do also ask about pets, because I know maybe when there's people dying, you shouldn't do that, but I do. They're helpless creatures, most of them, and they're loyal to us, so we should care about them too. I'd like to know what happened. Were they able to get the dogs out? So we'll find out. But my main guest today is Helen Joyce, who I've had on the show before. I love her. She is one of the most thoughtful, intuitive, rational speakers about the gender fallacy world that we live in right now. And I said in a Substack a couple of weeks ago that I'd been very deeply down a rabbit hole and had seen things that I wish I had not seen. I mean, this is also where we are now, right? The arguments about how far we should go to accommodate what is being called transgenderism, I'm just going to use that phrase for simplicity purposes, is completely blown apart when we realize that a section, a large and vocal and aggressive section of the men who self-identify as women are involved in an autogynephiliac fetish or paraphilia, as a forensic psychiatrist would likely call it, which is the arousal of dressing like a woman. Some of them dress like babies, like little girls, seriously, people, and wear diapers. And I went down a rabbit hole because I was interested in who the people are in these big trans events attacking Kelly J. Keene and other women who've been attacked for trying to protect women's rights and kids, because they seem to be of a type. You know, they're really aggressive. They are the ones who frequently look the least female. You know, they're the big fat guys with a blonde wig and kind of messy lipstick and almost a 5 o'clock shadow. I mean, so that's kind of a type. And that to me is suggestive, I'm just guessing here, of the autogynephiliac type, who are the ones who seem to really dislike women. Homicidally, it seems, if not homicidally, aggressively. And so I wanted to talk to Helen Joyce about that. But the main reason she's here, and I hope you find this useful, is because in all the coverage we've done of this issue, many parents have contacted me to say, okay, Trish, we get it. It's a problem. What do we do about it if we've got school-age children and they're being forced to witness and absorb a lot of ridiculous things in the classroom, what the teachers are saying, encouraging kids to claim the opposite gender and then not telling the parents, the exposure to pornography that they use in these, we used to call them health classes. I don't know what they're called now, but you know what I mean. So what do we do about that? Because the school boards individually are not going to be that active. I think we should be actively protesting and making the people elected to boards and appointed to boards across the country frightened if they continue down this road. And maybe that is lawsuits. If they're causing harm to children, then maybe civil litigation can come to stop it. But in the meantime, you have to deal what is in front of your face, which is your own children. And Helen Joyce, who knows so very much about this, is going to talk us through that at the end of the interview. We carved out some space to do that. I think you'll find it fascinating. She's done Jordan Peterson a couple of times. This is my third or fourth time interviewing her, both here and on my TNT radio show as well. I think she's one of the top thinkers in this field. And interestingly, she used to be an editor with The Economist magazine. And interestingly, although she is attacked and all kinds of terrible things happen to her, she seems to get attacked less than other people. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because she had originally journalistic bona fides, so the media might leave her alone a little bit more. I'm not sure, but it's quite interesting because she goes far and she's very, very learned in what she says. So we need to understand to whom we are completely remaking our world and granting civil rights to over the rights of women and children. And I think when you hear the descriptions of who some of these people are, it may spur you into some action with your school boards and indeed with the political candidates, right? We got to put this on the agenda, people, and not be afraid of being accused of being homophobic or transphobic, whatever. I don't even care about that. I care about truth. We cannot live in a world where there's no truth. We can't. It makes us sick. It's making our society sick. We can't do it. You have to speak the truth as you know it, and it will set you free. I found that on the podcast. It will set you free. I want to say this. I started last week's show sharing that I'd had a bit of a bad week with a kind of a very, very destabilizing professional event, and I was quite upset about it. But the response from you people was extraordinary. It just saved the day. I got a number of emails. I had a chance even to speak on the phone to somebody who is a listener but also has become a friend. And it made all the difference in the world. And here's what happened. This is so interesting. when I settled down, you know, we get triggered, right? When we're angry, and especially when we're too angry, which I get into now more than I have in a very long time. I have a flashpoint now that scares even me, and I got to work on it, right? But when that happens, and you speak to a friend who you trust, and you read these wonderful emails, I got people offering me a place to go to get away. Just astonishing generosity and care. Thank you. I realized, A, I was not alone, and B, that I could look at it in a way that wasn't terrifying for me. And of course, what I learned, people, and this is what they teach us in AA, and it's a lesson for all of us, I had my own side of the street in that. I had my own side of the street. I didn't act in a way that was conducive to resolving this very difficult creative and kind of organizational issue in a non-toxic way. And so when I admitted that and made my amends about it, it all kind of flattened out. The tension went away, the fear went away, the anger went away. We're just human beings trying to get along in a post-COVID world where they pit us against each other, isolated us. Many of us lost our skills on how to relate to each other. I think I did to some degree. I stopped being involved in large groups of people. So thank you for that. Your kindness and generosity helped me change the channel and fix something. My side of the street. I can't talk for other people involved in it. I can only be responsible for what I did and said. And I did take responsibility for it. And things are much better now. So I'm happy about that. Thank you very much. Let me do my pitch. We do very, very much appreciate your support. And that happens through Substack because it is a free speech platform. We're moving from Patreon, or we've moved from Patreon. We're moving from PayPal over to Substack to support the podcast. So Substack is a writing vehicle, and I do write pieces for Substack, which I love doing, but it's primarily a vehicle for supporting the podcast and the people who work here. So very, very grateful for that. I know that if you listen to 10 podcasts and read 10 Substack, it can get expensive. I understand that. So the people who have decided to support us, let me say thank you very much. Now, also, we are in the midst of sorting out our county highway edition winners. They're not really winners. It wasn't a contest, but, and we'll get that out. We'll get in touch with you. We'll get an email address and a mailing address so we can send those out. That was a very, very uplifting story. And I'm glad we did it because this week's show is not uplifting particularly. And we're back in the real world, folks, but this show is important today, and we have to look at things head on. So that's what we're doing. But you'll get your county highway, and thank you for all the kind comments about that show too. We ended that show with I didn't talk about it. I just played it. This new working class hero, voice of the downtrodden song, Rich Men North of Richmond, which is taking over the whole world. It's amazing. And it's being embraced by people of all colors and shapes and sizes. The guy who wrote it and sings it is named Oliver Anthony. So that's what I played at the end of last week's show. And next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about how music has always empowered the downtrodden. And boy, are the working class people and the middle class people now too downtrodden in the West. They just don't care about us at all anymore. What he is singing about is extremely dire. And the working class, since they sent the good factory jobs over to China, that was McKinsey. You know, it's like BlackRock. There are certain corporations I hate, and McKinsey and BlackRock are two of them, and created this level of poverty and the instance of working really hard at jobs that don't pay well enough for you to have a decent life. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that on next week's show, and I'm going to play some old-timey music that was the precursor of this kind of a song, including from a guy named Billy Ed Wheeler. one of my favorite composers of all time. I used to sing this stuff when I was a girl and played guitar. Gibson J45 jumbo acoustic. I wanted to be a bit of a Joni Mitchell type troubadour, but I didn't make it. Anyway, I became a journalist instead, still telling stories, right? So just getting back to my pitch, my Substack is Trish Wood is Critical. My Twitter, which is being throttled, thank you, Elon, is at Wood Reporting. And that's pretty fun because I do that first thing in the morning when I'm raring to go. And I have an Instagram as well. And we have a merch store, which was malfunctioning, but we're going to get it up and running again soon. And you can buy those wonderful no hats that seem to be our most popular piece of attire, and very appropriate too, because they're already talking about a new pandemic in the fall, and the crazies are getting scared and wanting to bring in all kinds of new mandates again. So get your no hat. We'll have it up and running next week. Get your no hat, and you can just point, no, I'm not doing that. Okay, let's go to Helen Joyce first. I think you're going to love this interview with her. Please stick all the way through because there's going to be good advice at the end. And then after we hear from Helen Joyce, we will be hearing from Darius Hurst from the Maui Times, just bringing us up to date on what the heck is going on down there. Hi, Helen. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm always happy to talk to you. I want to get to some specific ideas with you a little bit later on, because since I've had you on and others on, including our show with Richie, that I thought it really resounded with a lot of people, and I adore him. I want to ask you later what parents can do and how they should think about this.
Sure.
I get a lot of responses from people saying, help, what do we do? I even had a kind of a frantic email from a friend who had a kid going off to a camp that was embracing all of this. And she said, what do I do? I didn't realize. Can I pull him out at the last minute? What do I do? So the right decision was taken, which that he was an older kid with a good head on his shoulders and could be briefed ahead of time about what he was going to experience and how he might want to look at it. So that worked out. But there are lots of parents in this country who are terrified and don't know what to do. So we'll get to that. But I want to lay out a couple of things with you. And I think they're things we maybe haven't talked about yet. One of them is the idea that within this cohort of people who claim to be trans, it would seem to be, if not a growing, at least a hugely vocal and supremely protected class of people who don't actually technically qualify under the rules of what we used to call transsexualism back in the olden days, right? These self-identifying men who seem to be, a lot of them in the kind of autogynephilic fetish camp. And my experience from having watched a lot of the demonstrations is that it seems that those people, or many of those people, are in positions of loud, if not actual leadership, then leadership in the public eye. Am I right about that?
I'd sort of unpick what you said a little bit and say that, it's never been the case that there's a sort of a real transsexual and then other people who are sort of fakes or something like that.
Okay.
There's a range of reasons that somebody might feel that they really are members of the opposite sex. And the clinicians have always known that. They've always known that even if you just focus on the men who identify as women, there's different sorts of men who identify as women for different reasons. And they haven't tended to think of one of those reasons as being genuine and other reasons as being fake.
Interesting.
So they tend to, the original categorization, which I think some people still think is about the most accurate categorization of men who identify as women, is the ones who are straight and the ones who are gay. And the ones who are gay, it's just a fact that people who are gay are much more likely than other people to have been very gender non-conforming in their early youth. And depending on what their society is like and their family is like and what the ideas in their culture are like about what it means to be a very gender non-conforming little boy, they may come to the conclusion that they were meant to be girls. And you can think of this as a sort of internalized homophobia, really, that they learn from the culture around them that it's not okay to be that sort of boy. And they think, why am I so different? And some of these poor little boys come to the conclusion it's because they're really girls inside.
Yeah.
And so those are the sort of what I think most people think of when they think of a classic old style transsexual, because these are people who they're going to be heterosexual once they consider themselves women. They're going to think of themselves as women who want to sleep with men.
Right, right.
They're often quite feminine in their presentation and style. They're not, high impact in women's spaces, although I don't think that any men belong in women's spaces. But I mean, a gay man who presents very feminine is less of an impact than many other men would be.
Yeah. Well, one assumes he's not going to be flashing it around the way some are doing, right?
Exactly.
He's going to be more discreet. Yeah.
Totally separately from that, there are plenty of women who have gay male friends as best friends. And, if you go out clubbing or whatever, you almost call this person one of the girls.
Absolutely.
They sort of fit in, that has not been my experience particularly. But I hear that from other women. So those are the people that I think you might mean as the real transsexuals, but that's not how the clinicians have ever thought of it. They've thought that's just one group.
That's interesting. So I just want to clarify, because it's really interesting for me, because I'm always fascinated by these things in human nature and culturally. And I tend to deep dive them and have done so my whole life. And I'm flabbergasted about how little I actually knew about this phenomenon, which is strange for me. And people like you are educating me, thank God. But so here's what I thought, and then just come at that again and tell me what's wrong with it. I thought that there were men who, as children, were born believing they were women, and that they were so kind of frantically feeling, to use their phrase, trapped in the wrong body, right? That the extreme therapeutic response was, castration and all of the other stuff that has happened historically for people who cannot abide being in the wrong body. So I always said in my head, okay, those are legitimate people who, the struggle for them is real, right? But then there is a group of people who are fetishists about being a woman. And so what I'm doing in that kind of binary is categorizing somebody with a need, and what I feel is maybe an authentic need based on an actual psychiatric diagnosis, versus the kind of overweight men who slap on a blonde wig, don't shave, put on lipstick and a flowered dress and go to a protest and want to kill TERFs, and that they're doing it because of sexual gratification and getting an erection from that kind of denigration of women. This is how I see autogynephilia, right? So those are my two categories. So tell me how close I am, or if I'm not close at all, or if I should rethink how I'm thinking about this.
Sure. So I would say you're describing two categories pretty effectively, and those two categories are real. And I want us to hold the thought that there may be a new category that's been created by the internet in boys who are not particularly gender non-conforming, are not gay, but are just way too online. And that's an open question. So there might be that third category. But if we just set that aside for a moment, yes, there are two types. I would say, people aren't born thinking that they're members of the opposite sex. That's a story that people tell themselves to explain why they feel the way they do. And I know that sounds like I'm saying they're fakers. It's not that at all. We all tell ourselves stories. Yeah. And in medicine, and in particular in mental health medicine, doctors understand that what people tell them in all good faith and sincerity about why they feel the way they feel and when they started feeling that way and so on, it's just a story that people tell themselves to make sense after the fact. So if you want to know why people feel the way they do, you've got to do what are called prospective studies, which is starting with a large group of people, following them forward and seeing which ones of them develop whatever it is. So no, it's just not the case that there are some people who are born with some switch flicked in their heads that tells them that they're really members of the opposite sex. Later on, they discover they learn from their gender nonconformity that there's something wrong with them, and that's a cultural thing. Their culture tells them there's something wrong with them. The explanation they land on, which they become very, very invested in, is that really they're a woman inside. And this can happen when they're small. This can happen with little boys. And they just have no way to explain why they're so drawn to girl things, why they like girls better, why they look at their mother and think that's who they want to be, and so on and so forth. And in one culture, namely ours, those little boys believe that there's a girl inside because that's what the grown-ups tell them and that's what schools tell them and things. In another culture, they might believe that they're a third category. So, for example, in Samoa, there's the category of fa'afafine, which means in the manner of a woman. And little boys who are kind of swishy and feminine and, hang around with the girls and like to put flowers in their hair and so on are understood. They're not understood to be women, and they're understood to still be male, but people think they'll grow up in this third category. And then in yet another culture, like ours 20 years ago, in a family that was not homophobic, in a big city, people who understood what the research said would think, oh, good chance that boy's going to grow up gay. Still a man, not any third category, because we don't have one of those in Western cultures. And he'll understand why he's different when he goes through puberty. And so there was a lot of research that was done before about 2000, the early 2000s, in what happened to these little boys who ardently wished to be girls or thought they were really meant to be girls. And unless you tell them that they are really girls and tell everyone else that they're girls and change their pronouns and all that stuff, those boys overwhelmingly grow out of wanting to be girls. They understand themselves to be gay men when they grow up. I'm talking in broad brush here. It's not all of them, but it's most of them. So there isn't a sort of a real category of transsexual. It's a cultural phenomenon. It's an explanation that people who are unusual seize upon because it's out there in the culture.
And what about the men? Sorry.
There is still two categories. Yeah, you're right about the two categories. Yeah. So the other group are the straight ones. And they, I'd like to know if they exist in every culture, because I haven't seen anything written about these men in, for example, Thailand, where you have what are called ladyboys, who would be very
Katuis.
much.
I've seen them. Yeah.
That's very much the gay man who presents as a woman person. Yeah. I've never heard them talk there about these straight men who become completely erotically fixated on the idea of themselves as women. And that's something that tends to appear a bit later. We're not sure. Like, some of these men will tell you that they felt like this at their earliest memories. But people's earliest memories are just not accurate on these things. All of us retrofit what we understand about ourselves now to our history. And, probably they start in their early teens cross-dressing in secret. They may steal their mother's or their sister's clothes, and they may masturbate in, for example, their mother's underwear or their sister's underwear or things like that. Until recently, some men were very candid about these. You can read autobiographies of men who admit doing things like going out at night and stealing clothes off neighbours' washing lines, like, neighbouring girls' clothes. You used to be able to go on cross-dressing weekends, and it was understood to be about sexual arousal. There's lots of men who cross-dress for sexual arousal, and some of them end up basically falling in love with the woman that they create when doing this. So these men are basically really committed cross-dressers. And the longer they do it, the more that woman becomes real to them. And because we now have this cultural category of a trans woman, like a man who says he's a woman, that's something that they can inhabit. They can choose to really lean into. And in fact, they're applauded for doing it. So something that would have been done 20 or 30 or 50 years ago, only in private, maybe with your wife's knowledge or maybe behind her back, or at most done in groups, small groups with other men who had the same interests. They would find each other via magazines and so on. Mm-hmm. Now it's the woman is brought out into public and you're applauded for her, and you're told that, it's your right to go and use women's spaces, and it's your right to dominate women's groups and to play women's sport and all of those sorts of things. And so the fetish has been let out of the bedroom and imposed on everybody in all of society. So unsurprisingly, there's more of them doing it.
Yes, and it does seem, and this is completely unscientific and maybe will expose me to some ridicule since I try to be as fact-based and critically thinking as possible. But my sense of this, not being as close to it as you, obviously, is that some of the ugliness is maybe the most of the ugliness toward women is coming from this faction. That's my feeling about it.
I completely agree.
Oh, you do? Okay,
yeah,
good.
I do.
Okay.
And that's not just speculation. It's informed speculation as well. So as I said, the people who looked at these men who insisted that they were really women right from the start, so the first doctors who took this in any way seriously were in Germany in the 1920s. So if you count forward from then, they've always known that there were different sorts of people who came to this conclusion, different sorts of men. But the person who actually gave names to the two sorts of men was Ray Blanchard, who's now retired. He's a psychoanalyst, I guess, or psychologist in Canada. And he named them homosexual transsexual, which HSTS people say. And that's the gay men who in the end just find it so much easier to present as a woman. But they're not delusional. They know they're not women, but they just find it much easier to live like that, and they get more of what they want in life by living like that. And they're not aggressive, and they just want to fade into the background, you know. Yeah. And then these other men whom he called autogynephiles. So autogynephilia is it's a coinage from the Greek. It means love of oneself as a woman. And he studied them, and you know, he wasn't negative about them particularly. Like, he wasn't saying, oh, one sort's real and one sort's false. But he has a lot of astute observations of them. And one of them is that these men, the fantasy isn't to cross-dress or to pretend to be a woman. The fantasy is to really be a woman. And that means that it can be disrupted by naming it. So if you've got a man whose entire sexual desire and fantasy life is framed around him being a woman, really a woman, then you have to treat him as if he's really a woman, or otherwise you get him very angry. You've destroyed it all. And it's a very narcissistic sort of mindset to think of yourself as really a woman. And narcissists very much dislike people disrupting their self-image. They experience what's labelled, in clinical psychology, it's labelled narcissistic rage. And if
that
you
is
think,
so smart. That's
yeah,
so
I mean,
smart.
that's what you're seeing. You're seeing narcissistic rage. And then why are they so horrible to women? I mean, the reason is because women have what they want. And I don't just mean that women are women. I mean that women have... women are the ones they want to accept them as women. So they care much less what men think. They want women to accept them into women's spaces, women to act as the supporting actresses, you know, women to say, gosh, you look amazing, I love your makeup. And there are women who do this, and I look at them and I think, like, what lack of self-respect do you have? Like, you see some guy who's dolled himself up and he looks ridiculous, and then there's this bunch of, honestly, totally lacking in self-respect women going, oh girl, you do your makeup so great, like I wish I could take tips from you. And like, I don't know what they're doing. But anyway, if a woman says, you know, you do you, wear what you like, but you're not a woman, she's disrupting his fantasy, and he lashes out with narcissistic rage against her. So Ray Blanchard has commented on that. He has said that the rage that he sees at the protests and also online, you know, he thinks this is autogynephiles and that it's narcissistic rage.
Well, hooray. That's amazing to hear, because once you raise that issue, well, I just want to say two quick things. One of the things I want to say is that I did see, and I'm going to write about on my Substack, a little mini doc that some brilliant person did that showed some of the porn and the other kind of accoutrement that accompany this. And I can't unsee what I saw. So
no, you can't. I know. I also looked at some of this stuff when writing my book. I mean, because they insist that it doesn't even exist, by the way.
Oh, I know. I know.
And that's again because it disrupts it. So they want you to believe that there is no such thing, because there's a wonderful phrase that a journalist called Alice Drager created, which is that it is the love that would really rather you did not speak its name.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Well, and what I saw, let me just explain just to you how I went down the rabbit hole. There was a Twitter feed about some of these men donning fake pregnancy bellies in order to not just be a woman, but be a pregnant woman, which to me is like really slaughtering the sacred cow, if I can put it that way. Really? Like, we can't even have that anymore? You're going to take that too. And I went down the Twitter of the company that I saw the label of the company that made the fake pregnancy belly that the person was unpacking. And I went to their Twitter feed, and this is where my nightmare began, because they also make women's suits. So it's kind of like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. I hate to say that, but he was making a woman's suit to wear out of actual women's skin that he was murdering. You can buy that now. You can buy a latex woman's suit that you unzip it and you step into it with a face too, with a fake woman face. So you're wearing a costume, but claiming some kind of female reality so that you can have a better experience masturbating, which they showed in some of these videos, which are the ones I didn't want to see. Like, it was like, I saw the movie Midnight Cowboy when I was quite young. It's an old movie, but it showed some of the debauchery in New York City back in the day. And that's how I felt. Like, I really thought, wow, is this what the human rights struggle is all about now? Protecting this behavior? Yeah. Right. So that was my next thing. Having said that to you, I just wanted to alert you that I've seen these horrible things, but it does raise the issue of human rights, and that all of this fetishistic behavior which does seem to devalue and hate women, is now protected under human rights. Because why, are people too lazy to kind of tease out who's who in this thing, or what? How did this happen?
I mean, I think part of it is desperate naivety on the part of women. You know, some women really are very dumb about what men are like. And I say this as a heterosexual married woman who has plenty of male relatives and friends that I'm very fond of. But the fact is that male sexuality is pretty weird in some circumstances. You know, there's men have almost all the fetishes. So it's men who like wearing rubber. They're the ones who, care about feet and rubber and feathers and cross-dressing and all of that. Like they're just strange. Like a significant number of men have really strange sexual interests.
Yeah.
And we knew until very recently that cross-dressing was one of those. And so the naivety thing is you want to be able to say you do you, wear what you like. And to some extent I do want to say that. I don't care what people are doing as long as it's not impacting upon other people. And I would just like to do a shout out for the wives at this point, though. You know, it's all very well to say, oh, well, that man, he likes staggering around the place looking like an absolute twit in that high-heeled, those high-heel shoes or whatever. The poor wife has to put up with this bullshit, and I bet you he didn't tell her before they got married. But anyway, for the rest of us, you want to just be able to say, like, do what you like. But until recently, we understood that cross-dressing was a paraphilia or a fetish. And the thing about fetishes is they co-occur. Like, somebody who has one is much more likely to have another than the general population is. And many men who have fetishes have 5 or more. So you're talking about the same man who is interested in cross-dressing, pretending to be a baby and wearing nappies and, dirtying them, being pissed on, wearing rubber and a ball gag and being beaten or whatever, all these things, like people, the same people have them. So you're not talking, when you just talk about people cross-dressing, you're not talking about a drag queen. You're not talking about a gay man who likes to really mix it up with clothes and, fancy his hair and do his nails with his girlfriends. You're talking about people in the group of which there are large numbers who have other fetishes, and in particular age ones and ones that are to do with degradation or, dirtiness or humiliation. Or sadism, And, again, it's not my business what other people do in the bedroom between consenting adults, but it's broken out of the bedroom and it's been called a human right because of this catastrophic naivety and because of the way it's hijacked other human rights movements. Like the greatest bit of cultural appropriation in all of history has to be the bit where gender identity got yoked onto sexual orientation in this acronym SOGI. They are completely different things. And people
what's the acronym? Tell me what the acronym is.
SOGI, S-O-G-I, sexual orientation and gender identity. It's like the LGBT, like the way the T got harnessed to the LGB. And they're just so completely different. And so instead of just having people who are the same as everybody else, it just so happens that the sort of people they like to go to bed with and want to get married to are their sex rather than the opposite sex.
Yeah.
You've got people who have a whole range of the sorts of sexual interests and behaviours that honestly cannot easily be accommodated in public life. And you see this when you look at pride parades now. You've got men with their arses out wearing chaps. You've got people dressed in full leather, gimp outfits. You've got guys on chains being brought along like, adult, animals. It's just become a parade of degradation.
Yes.
And I mean, like if this was in a club in some back street at 2 a.m. in New York City, okay, fine. I don't ever have to go there. But it's not. It's out on the street.
Well, we had this, there's an interesting piece of tape because the Toronto Pride parade, which I used to march in back in the day. I was one of those young professional women with a lot of gay male friends. And, I called them sister, and my best friend died of AIDS. Like I love those guys. And I was a campaigner against HIV and AIDS policy when it was stupid, which it mostly was. But so I was proud to do that. And now I see the gay pride parade, and it's the guys in the pup play and the chaps. And this year there was quite a lot of nudity and complete nudity. And there are photographs of the gay pride parade with these nude guys, some of them with terrible bodies. It's like, how do they even manage that? But in front of children. And somebody said to a policeman, isn't it wrong? Like, you can't just be nude in a city at will. And the cop, I guess they've been given their talking point, said, it's okay as long as you don't have an erection. This is the talking point now from the Metro Police, I guess. And I thought, boy, this is a really low bar now.
It really is. It's a male sexual rights movement that's managed to use the Buffalo Bill analogy thing again, like it's like it's taken over the skin of a civil rights movement, and what we've actually got is this male sexual rights or privileges movement that's taken it over. And so now all the things, because male sexuality can be dark, even the non-fetishistic male sexuality. It has to be harnessed, it has to be kept in check. There's a reason we have institutions like marriage. There's a reason that we have laws against exhibitionism and voyeurism, which are overwhelmingly male crimes committed against often very young girls. Which is why we tell men that they have to keep their pants on in public. And again, not all men. God, you always have to say #not all men when you have these discussions, because men get so defensive. But like, most men aren't like this, but a significant number are. And you have to build that into public policy.
And what's interesting about what you just said, Helen, too, and this is where I get sort of pissed off, because I was a campaigner and I do believe in civil and human rights for people to have what everybody has, right? Gay people have everything we have now. I don't know what the new thing, they probably have more because they're a protected class. So why aren't they en masse, and why aren't the non-fetishistic trans people lobbying against the co-option of this movement by people who are, I believe they are a threat. I think they're a threat to women. I think they're a threat to a healthy society. I think they're a threat to children in many ways. And I'm not just talking about pedophilia, because I don't think all trans people are pedophiles. That would be silly.
Yeah, or even most of them.
Nor even most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the dragging of kids into these shows with drag queens and the twerking and stuff like this is not healthy. And then if you look at, and even here in good old kind of, provincial Canada, we're showing books that are essentially graphic novels of pornography to kids. This is harmful, and we all know it, right?
Yes.
So why aren't the other people in the LGBTQ cutting loose this toxic side of it? See, this is why I'm getting mad, because I feel like women were gay men's natural allies when nobody else gave a shit about them. And now I feel like they're just sort of tossing us to the wolves, as they say. I'm quite mad about it.
Yeah, I am too, very much. And I know that plenty of people inside the LGB grouping, in particular, a lot of lesbians are too. Mm-hmm. So I think what we didn't know at the time is that quite a significant number of the people inside the gay rights campaign were actually men's sexual rights campaigners rather than actually gay rights campaigners. Yeah. So they wanted gay men to be able to do whatever they wanted, not on an equality basis, but because it was what men wanted. And of course, that's by no means all. I wouldn't even say it was the majority of them. But those people, nobody understood that's what they wanted, because everybody was travelling in the same direction. So I'm friends with some of the people who founded Stonewall, which was our main gay rights movement here in the UK. And it was founded to fight against a very horrible law in the 1980s, which is called Section 28. It was a particular rule that said that schools could not promote pretend family relationships or pretended relationships, And what that meant was gay relationships. And it meant that teachers and schools couldn't tackle homophobic bullying because they would be seen as promoting what were not regarded as real relationships. So it was actually a huge problem, and Stonewall and others campaigned against it. And I know some of the people who were founding members of that. And then along came the trans movement, and it split the people who founded that fight, like the founded Stonewall and who were fighting with them at the time, in ways that I don't think any of them could have predicted. And so you've got men to whom it was obvious that they did it because gay people are human people too, who have the right to the same things as everybody else does, who want to be able to form stable relationships the same way that straight people can. And they didn't know that some of the people who were in the same movement as them saw it completely differently, which was what men want, men should get. And now that's what you see. And I think the biggest proof that the gay men who are in the what men want, men should get camp know very well that trans women are not women is because they want trans women to get what they want. They know they're men. They think of them as their brothers. they see those trans women as men who want to be able to go into women's spaces, men who want to be able to dress a particular way, men who want to impose themselves on lesbians because they call themselves lesbians. And they think, well, men should get what they want sexually, as we did. They see them as gay men's brothers. And I mean, honestly, it's the biggest betrayal. It's the biggest betrayal. The gay men I know who fought side by side with some of these men who are now the worst anti-women, disgusting, misogynistic, horrible gay men, like just revolting people. Some of them are in Parliament. Some of them are in our MPs. Some of them are in the House of Lords. And the way they behave and talk about women would make you want to vomit. And if I were one of the gay men who had worked with them in the 1980s and 1990s, it would be the deepest betrayal. I actually do experience it as a betrayal, even though, unlike you, I didn't have exactly the same upbringing. I have a gay son. And I look at these people and I say to him all the time, don't be like that. Don't talk to women like that. Don't act towards women like that. I don't think he would. He's a darling. But, you know, there's these horrific, horrific gay men who are the most misogynistic people you will ever meet. And nobody knew that. True. And it's until somebody said no to them, we didn't even know that.
Well, you know where the inkling of that was, and I'm old enough to be able to tell this story with some conviction because I saw it happen. When AIDS and HIV were becoming a thing, and the unbelievably prescient and brilliant late Larry Kramer, was running the gay men's health crisis in New York. And you know, AIDS was not called AIDS, and it was called gay cancer, I believe. And all the guys who'd been going out to Fire Island in the Hamptons were getting sick and dying of this really weird cancer called Kaposi sarcoma, which is absolutely doesn't happen in healthy young. It's so rare, right? So Larry said, "Ugh, there's something going on." Did a bit of research about, you know, what was happening on Fire Island. There was a lot of orgies, a lot of, in those days of gayness and gay politics, there was a lot of promiscuous gay sex with all kinds of weird stuff going on and multiple partners. So Larry said, we got to close the bathhouses, guys, until we figure out what's going on. Clearly this is contagious. It might be a sexual contagion. And he was, you know, attacked for it. And here too, I did a show about it, and I wanted to speak to somebody about closing the bathhouses in Toronto, which were extremely active. And by the way, which my dead friend, where he caught AIDS actually, and died from it. They felt it was their right to behave this way, and any challenge to promiscuity, exotic sexual practices, no matter how kind of dangerous from an infective point of view, that was their right, and they were not going to give it up under any circumstance. And that was fought for a very, very, very long time.
And it's still going on. So, I mean, I think it was a year or two ago, there was some talk about Hampstead Heath, big park in London, where there's a great deal of public sex in the undergrowth. But it's also a park that children use all the time. And so this has been an ongoing issue of parents saying, you know, a ball gets kicked into the undergrowth, the child goes in and there's two men having sex in the undergrowth, like in the daytime, you know? So anyway, there was a lot of talk about, you know, cutting back the undergrowth. So this stopped. And I said, this makes total sense. Like, you can't have people having sex in public. Like, you just can't. And then suddenly I get piled on as homophobic. Like, people are saying that I'm homophobic. I think it's homophobic to say that gay men can't keep it in their pants. Like, so then, I mean, I actually got DMs from some men I had thought were sensible gay men saying things like, you know, well, some people can't afford to get a hotel room, or they can't do it at home because their parents are homophobes. I'm sorry. Yeah, we can't have people having public sex during the day in parks where there are children. This is not a point about gay men. But yeah, so, I mean, and another example would be, there was an article in LA Review of Books a few years ago about Pete Buttigieg, who's a married gay man. Yeah. And he's very square, you know, like he dresses very mainstream. So does his partner. The pair of them.
He's a McKinsey guy. Yeah. He's a McKinsey
exactly.
guy.
And they both seem like that. And it was a picture of the two of them, I think, by a doorstep, like maybe in front of their house or something like that, just looking very McKinsey. And the headline was heterosexuality without women. What they were saying was he wasn't queer, you know, he was gay, but like who he wanted to sleep with and marry was kind of secondary compared to the fact that he wasn't queer. Like he wasn't anti-heteronormative. So that's a big fight that, you know, those of us who are straight maybe don't see all the time within the LGBT grouping. Like, are you talking about queer or are you talking about sexual orientation? And if you're talking about sexual orientation, you don't want either these fetishists who want to get naked in front of children in public, or think at least that it's their right to do it. And you also don't want the sort of tourist straight girls or boys who just think it's boring to be straight and think they'll dye their hair blue and, get their nipples pierced and turn up to Pride with a T-shirt saying that their pronouns are they, them, Yeah. So, one is like, there's so many girls who call themselves bisexual or pansexual or NB or whatever, or say, my pronouns are she, they, or this sort of thing. And I mean, they've never slept with a girl. They've never even kissed a girl. Yeah. It's just they don't want to be a boring cis straight.
It's the unicorn special pony, thing in school, right? You get the pretty rainbow.
That's the sort of the fight within the LGBT grouping. And, I think that it's actually heating up. Like there was an interesting opinion poll recently. I think there was one here in the UK and another one in the US. And both of them showed significant falls in general acceptance of LGBT, but in particular T. And I think that a growing number of gay people are waking up to the fact that if they get lumped in with the fetishists, that's very, very bad for them.
Well, you have a guy over there in the UK. It's most of the people who come on my show to talk about this are from the UK. And I don't know why that happened. I don't know what it is. You're a bit of a petri dish over there in a sense you're kind of ahead of us on everything, on both the embracing, the codifying, and now the kind of pullback that seems to be happening. But one of your, I can't remember his name. Goodness, I know you'll know who I mean. He has a really good Twitter, LGB, maybe without the T or something. And he did a fantastic interview on GB News. And he was you could see he'd had enough. He's a gay man. He'd had enough. And he said, what they are doing is they are practicing conversion therapy on young gay boys, right?
I think this might be Dennis Kavanagh. Is that the name?
It is Dennis. Dennis.
Dear friend.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, this guy, he's nailing it. It really shook me up that he put it that way, that they're trying, because conversion therapy is the worst thing in the world. And I actually believe for gay people, it's a terrible thing. But if we're surgically adjusting gay boys, young gay men, to meet this new paradigm, then how is that not that? I mean, it's obvious.
I know, it's physical conversion therapy, isn't it? You're turning a gay boy. It's the worst sort of thing you could do. I think that a lot of people get confused, and to relate it back to the first thing that you said, which is that there are real trans people and then fakers.
Yeah.
If you think that there are real trans people and you think they're born this way, then what we're talking about is just a question of identifying the right ones. Yeah. And so a lot of gay people, like, we can't all pay attention to everything. Like, it's not possible to pay attention to more than one thing in a million in this world. There's just too much information out there. If you think, maybe not very worked out in your head, but you think that there is this real category trans, that it's possible to be born with some switch flicked the wrong way in your head. Yeah. And, it's very tragic and horrific, but the doctors know how to identify those people. They know what you should do with those people. And I mean, it's a difficult pathway that these people have to go on, but, life can be very hard sometimes. Why would anyone be cruel enough to add to that, telling them that they're not who they say they are? And you think of those people and you instinctively think like, that the people who are negative about this way of seeing the world are the same people who were probably very negative about you, a gay person, when you were young and a teenager.
Yeah.
So when someone like me says, I don't think that men can become women, it's just not possible. I think there are men who want to be women, and I want to be compassionate about those men, and I want to see why they feel like that and see what we can do to help them. They hear that as the same as somebody who says, I'm very sorry for the fact that there are some gay people, but they're mistaken and they could be getting therapy to help them to understand that that is a disordered way of living. And, so they're living in a false analogy. And when people have got that sort of wrong idea in their head, it's remarkably resistant. And they just assume that everybody who opposes is the same people oppose both of them, and that they're homophobes, that they're probably far-right Christians,
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson said an interesting thing to you that really landed with me, and that was that this phenomenon is maybe the only place, or one of the only places, in psychotherapy and psychiatry where the patient self-diagnoses, and you have to accept that.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
It's really weird. It's very, very weird. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is a hangover from a time when what we would call gender norms were much, much stricter. So the early doctors who tried to codify this were in 1960s and 1970s, and they were living at a time when they believed, they believed a lot of things that we now know are false, but some very contradictory things. Like they tended to believe that there were no genuine psychological differences between men and women, that it was all cultural and that it was done very early on in life. But they also seemed to believe that it was very, very important that you brought little boys up to be boyish and little girls up to be girlish. And they, I don't know why, if you think that it's all just cultural, like why do you feel you have to put people into those pink and blue boxes? But they very much did think that way. And so they thought that you were talking about people that you could diagnose according to a checklist by how gender non-conforming they were, because those people were the people that the early acculturation had failed to take in. So if you got a little boy who came in to a clinic, and very, very few did, unless you actually did research, like there was a particular famous study that was done in LA in I think the 1970s and 80s that actively sought out boys whose parents were at their wits' end because these little boys kept saying, I'm really a girl, I wish I didn't have a penis, I was meant to be a girl, God made a mistake with me, that sort of thing. You really had to go looking to find them. Anyway, he studied these little boys, and I have the book, it's out of print, and it's a big long book, and it's got loads and loads and loads of interviews with the parents and clinical observations of the kids. And he seems to think that it's exactly the same, the little boy saying, I'm really a girl, and the little boy displaying very gender non-conforming behaviour. So he doesn't distinguish between those two things, really. They just seem to go together to him. And now we've at least pay lip service to not liking the gender stereotypes. We think anyone can wear anything. We think that a girl can be an astronaut and a boy can be a ballet dancer and so on and so forth. But we've hung on to the idea that you listen to what people tell you about what they really are inside. And so those two things are separated out in a way, and one is called gender identity and one is called gender expression. And I've tried this. I've tried saying to people who believe all this nonsense and who teach children this nonsense in schools using things like the gender unicorn and the genderbread person and the gender spectrum, all of which should just be torn down and burnt. But I've said to them, can you not hear how regressive it is, and how you're peddling stereotypes as being the definitions of what it is to be a boy or a girl? And they say, no, that's gender expression. I'm talking about gender identity. And then I say, well, how does a child know which gender identity they have? How do you know if you're a little boy that you actually feel like a little girl? You don't know what little girls feel like. It's an experience that's completely alien to you and will be all your life, because you are actually a little boy. Whatever you feel is something a little boy feels. It can only be about the stereotypes. What the little boy learns, no matter what the teacher says, is if I like Barbie, if I like pink, if I like glitter, if I want to swish around the place dressing up as a fairy or Elsa on book day, then that is me having a gender identity of a girl. So we've gone right back to the, it's all about the stereotypes, but we're just not admitting it to ourselves. Yeah. It's very strange. It's the most strange mixture and weird self-contradictory belief system.
Well, there's a lot of that going on in our culture right now, where nuance and data and critical thinking is a threat to a whole bunch of stuff that people don't want to look at. And that's why, and I don't know if you experience this too, but I certainly experience a lot of anxiety around those things. When I hear somebody, say to a person who's saying, well, maybe, having trans surgery on 13-year-olds is not a good idea, and this weight of the world and accusations of transphobia fall on them to crush them, I'm like, well, they're not transphobic if they're just saying we need guardrails. But everything on the side of the activists is absolute. And anybody who wants to have a nuanced discussion like you, and me and others are up for not just cancellation, but destruction. And what's scary about that paradigm is that the institutions that should be on our side are not, right? They are on the extreme side on the free speech issue, on the medical issue, in Canada, we have a very, very strong law about conversion therapy, meaning you cannot question someone's self-diagnosis as trans. It's a criminal offense, right? So we're the people struggling with what this means for everybody. They're declaring something that on its face is absurd, but they're getting all of the support from the institutions that should be mediating this in a way that is data-based, and that's not happening.
See, I think the thing is that it can't be answered as a data question. There is no way through on this except from first principles. Like, it is not the case that there are certain children who are better off transitioning. Like, if it's a human rights abuse, as I believe it is, to sterilize a child, it's a human rights abuse to sterilize any child.
I agree, yeah.
And doesn't matter if that child is deluded enough to think that they're the one that it's right for. It doesn't matter if their parents consent to it. It's just a human rights abuse. End of story. And from their point of view, if it's possible to be born in the wrong body or born with some switch in your brain that makes you really a girl inside when actually you're a boy or whatever, there isn't anybody who'd be able to tell except the person themselves. So they're quite absolutist positions. I mean, an analogy I would draw is the disagreement between somebody who is religious, and I'll pick traditional Catholicism because that's how I was brought up, and someone who's an atheist, which is what I am now.
Yeah.
It isn't that I think or that they think that some people have souls and Christ died for some people and some people are going to have afterlives, and those are the Catholics, while the atheists don't have those things and Christ did not die for them, and those people will, not have an afterlife. We each of us think something about everybody, and we think the other person is entirely wrong in their worldview.
Yeah.
And okay, so we live in a secular society where we have freedom of religion and freedom of belief. So we don't go forcing our viewpoints down other people's throats. But the fact is, the things we believe are completely incompatible. And that's the same here. Either it really is just a physical reality, whether you're male or female, and that's literally true for everybody, no matter what they believe about themselves, or the things that people believe about themselves overwrite the physical reality, in which case nobody else has any right to an opinion. And this can't be solved by data. It's a worldview thing.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, I regard them as the equivalent of an old school fire and brimstone crusading type religion, the sort of intolerant religion that regards everybody who doesn't believe in the religion as somebody who is, non-human, available for any sort of cancellation. Yeah. Like, I think of them as like the leaders of, Saudi Arabia, or the old style crusaders who went out and slaughtered infidels. They're not willing to just say, I believe one thing and you believe another thing. It's a religion, and it's a terrible, wicked religion that isn't recognized as a religion. So it's being treated as if it's a civil rights movement when it's actually a cult, and a cult that wants everybody to sign up to it, and that treats anyone who leaves as an apostate and a heretic. And because we don't recognize it as what it is, we're dealing with it all wrong. We're thinking that it's, the next stage after gay rights. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem, to have it mischaracterized. Like, anyone who says that you should stop a child's puberty and then put that child on cross-sex hormones, and then when they hit 18, cut out their sexual organs, that is doing something that we would have to look back quite a long way to find somebody else who did. Like, even lobotomies weren't done on children. I mean, they make me think of the Aztecs, actually. Like, it's that out there. And yet,
because they sacrificed children, the Aztecs, right?
Yeah. And so this one, you're not taking the child's life, but you're sacrificing the child's health, the child's fertility, the child's chance to work out the sort of person that they really are, because puberty is essential to that. Puberty is the last of the big growing phases. So they're doing a truly, truly terrible thing. And if it wasn't masquerading as a civil rights movement, we would all see how terrible it was.
It's interesting when you are talking about kids having the surgeries, because I was thinking about that this morning coming into this interview with you, and I was thinking about Richie too. And I mean, imagine the horror movie it is for you to wake up one day and say, I think I made a mistake. I'm not those things, and realizing that you've been castrated, that this important part of your physiology is now gone. I mean, it must be like living in a horror movie now, right? Like,
completely. I think about it all the time. I mean, It is why I wrote the book. Yeah. And people say it's not happening to children. Firstly, it is happening to children. There are papers, published academic papers in America, in which they went and asked people who do these operations, have you ever done them on minors? And nearly all of them have. And it's not common to do them on minors except for the breast removal, but it isn't unknown. But the more important point is that the pathway that minors are put on, which starts with social transition, meaning dressing a little boy or a little girl up as a member of the opposite sex and telling everybody that they're a member of the opposite sex, that leads with some certainty to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and that leads to the surgery. And if you go on puberty blockers early in puberty, and then you go straight from the puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, your sexual organs don't mature. Like a little boy who skips the whole of male puberty, his testicles will never grow into something that can produce sperm. And a little girl who's put on puberty blockers and then straight onto testosterone, her ovaries will never mature into something that ovulates. And so you skip entirely the process of becoming fertile. So yes, we are sterilizing children, even if we're not cutting out those organs until they're adults. It's a sterilizing pathway. It's sheer evil. I look at this and I think I'm staring in the face of evil.
And so what happens in that circumstance? I completely agree with you, Helen. I feel the same way. And I've had the great misfortune of actually looking at the photographs of some of the handiwork of these surgeons, and it's a nightmare. Yes. And I also do follow Axel Lansik. I don't know if you ever look at her videos, but she's, I think she's somewhat autistic, also maybe trans, but I think
she identified as trans for a while. She's not someone I follow, actually.
She does these great, well, not great, but they're interesting videos where she deconstructs TikTok videos of people who've had surgeries. And what's interesting, she's quite smart. And what she says is that, like an 18 or a 20-year-old person will have the dire kind of surgery, bottom surgery, and everything will go wrong. Like there'll be 3 years of peeing through into a urine bag and infection after infection, and nothing's working. And what's interesting about what she describes in analyzing what these people are saying, none of whom are regretful, right? They say, I'm not saying this is a bad thing to do, right? They're justifying what must be an absolute horror show for a reason I don't understand, except that it goes back to your point that this is a cult like religion. They don't feel they can criticize their surgeons. They don't feel like they can say, wow, I've lost my penis and now I'm peeing through a bag. What do you call that when you're peeing through a bag? You call it a catheter?
It's a catheter, yeah. So it's not because it's the cult, actually. That's not the reason for that. It's because it's the same thing as I said about people essentially creating a backstory for how they feel now. Thinking to yourself, I was a fool, I believed people who lied to me, and those people may include your parents, certainly will include your doctor and your therapist, people who told you that this would make you feel better and it's not making you feel better. That is such a catastrophic blow that very few of us are actually strong enough to do it. I mean, that's what's unusual about Richie Herron, is that he's capable of looking at what happened and saying that was a mistake. Most of us justify our mistakes. We say, well, it didn't work out the way we thought it would, but I made the right decision at the time, rather than thinking, actually, I should have said to those surgeons, show me your success rates, please. I should have thought to myself, and I'm not blaming the people who do it, they're all lied to. I'm not one of those people who says adults can do what they like with their bodies. What I care about is children. Adults can do what they like about their bodies if they're being given enough of the correct information to make an informed decision. And that's not happening. They're being told that they have a condition that does not exist, namely a sort of a wrong brain in their body. They're being told that this will make them feel better when there is zero evidence of that and emerging evidence that it will not. They're being told that these surgeries are effective when actually, they can't possibly make anything remotely similar to the genitals of the opposite sex. No. I mean, anyone who actually thinks about this, just engage your brain for 30 seconds, I want to say to them. If you've ever examined your own genitals or had sex with another human being, you will know these are exquisitely complex organs. My God, penises can get erections, they can ejaculate. The vagina can stretch to take a baby's head. It's just, these are not things that you can mimic by cutting up bits of the opposite sex. Ugh. It's just absurd.
It's completely absurd. And what you're describing, and I think this is really important for people to understand, is that telling people you are creating a penis or a vagina that has any even remote possibility of mimicking the real thing it's malpractice. It's a lie.
Completely. It is completely, it absolutely is. You know, when they started to do these operations, and the operations on men are somewhat more successful than the operations on women. There's an ugly expression that the doctors sometimes use, which is that it's easier to dig a hole than to build a pole. And so you use the skin of the penis and the scrotal sac, which are rich in nerves, and you try to save as many of the nerves as you can. You take out all the insides. You make a cavity in the perineum, which is the gap between where you poo from and where your penis is. You make a cavity in there. None of this is straightforward, and you sort of invert it and put it in there. And, you know, it's more complex than that. And then you kind of tidy it up and you use the skin from the scrotal sac to make it look like the labia. And of course, it's not self-cleaning. It's not self-moisturizing or lubricating. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not something that can stretch and close. It's not surrounded by muscle as the vagina is. There isn't a clitoris. And, you know, in case people don't know, the clitoris isn't just the bit that sticks out. There's a whole load of clitoris that's under the skin and that goes all the way around the vagina. So this, you know, it's a beautiful and complex and incredibly elaborate, evolved part of the body with many functions, including sexual pleasure, including holding a pregnancy and including giving birth. You know, menstrual blood comes out. Like, so many things happen down there. It's self-cleaning, it's self-lubricating. And, you know, the skin from a man's penis can do none of this. So, but it's still better than what they do to the women, because at least it looks right. So some of the early men that they did this on were so fixated on being a woman and so utterly, utterly fixated on having female genitals in particular, that those men were happy-ish at being given something that looked about right. And I think the doctors justified it to themselves, knowing perfectly well that what they were doing was not at all, you know, functional or good. By the, you know, those men were happy with how it looked. And somehow now the fact that that's all it ever was has been forgotten, and they're basically giving little children the idea that you can have an operation that'll fix you up to make you, you know, you're a girl with a penis. Don't worry about it. You'll go on puberty blockers. You'll go on cross-sex hormones, and when you're a grown-up, you know, the doctors will fix it for you. And I read some extracts from a book about trans children, a pro-transition family book, and it had all these quotes from parents. It was American, of course, American parents saying things like, you know, I learned so much from my little trans guy. He's such a hero. You know, he leads and we follow. You know, he's a special little person. Mother of trans boy 4. And I mean, this is a girl. Like, this is a little girl who is now being called a boy by everybody. And of course, she's going to look like a boy, because children can look like a boy or a girl at that age, depending on how they're dressed and their hair is done and what you tell everybody they are. How's that little girl meant to understand that what she's got between her legs is an exquisite, evolved capacity that as an adult will give her sexual pleasure, will allow her to give birth, will allow her to grow a baby, all of those sorts of things, that's, you know, absolutely central to her health because it's her endocrine system, and that these idiots think that they can turn that into something that's remotely like the man's equivalent, which is also a beautiful, evolved, exquisite, multifunctional thing that's completely central to men's health. You know, it's such a wicked and evil thing to do. And this sort of like, my child leads. We learn so much from my child.
It's just grotesque. I mean, and what they do with women who are wanting to be male.
Yeah, that's even worse.
They sew a hot dog on their abdomen. Essentially, it looks like a hot dog. Yeah, right.
And they've cut it off a thigh or an arm.
Oh, I know. It's just,
and you have to use a pump to get it to pretend to have an erection. And it's not like it's going to be massively pleasurable for you. Like, I wonder if the people who do these things or think about these things have ever actually had decent sex.
Here's what I think they think. And I will say, I've talked about Matt Walsh a fair bit on the show, and I thought he did a really good public service. I always agree with his posturing, but when he interviewed the experts in What is a Woman and showed how irrational they are, that when challenged with facts or difficult questions, they shut down. It says something about who they are. And here's what I think. I think the only way they can keep going, unless they're psychopaths, and they may well be, is that they've convinced themselves of the old lie that if we're not doing this, people are going to kill themselves. So bad transition surgery is always better than no surgery, right? I think that's
exactly right. Yeah, there's a range between good people who've bought that lie and the psychopaths who are being concealed within it. I mean, I have seen some horrific doctors, holding up, there's one famous or notorious picture of a guy who does mastectomies, I think in Canada, holding up a bucket with the breast tissue, the discarded breast tissue from girls. And he's wearing a Santa hat because it's around Christmas. I mean, and then there's I'm sorry to say, an Irish surgeon who practices in America who does these awful little TikTok videos where she makes sad faces, like only doing 6 chest masculinization surgeries today. Like, what is wrong with these people? They are just, it just seems sick to me.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And then in between this is every sort of variation. I mean, there's people who just think like, well, this is what they want and the customer is always right. I know people who've gone back to their doctors to tell them that this did not give them what they thought that they would get. And they have found that so traumatizing that in some ways it was worse than the original surgery. I don't know if you're unlucky enough to know a woman who has been raped and who has gone to trial, and some of those women will tell you the trial was worse than the rape.
Yeah,
it's a bit like that. Your doctor tells you that they can do this fantastic job. They can make your chest look like it's a man's chest, and then you've got this mess that's got like scars, and the nipples are all wrong, and it's constantly painful, and so on. And you go back to them, and they say, "Yeah, but you asked for it. It's what you wanted."
Oh God, yeah. I think I may have said the last time we talked that maybe the civil courts are going to sort this out with major malpractice awards around this, which will compel the insurance agency to say or the insurance companies to say we're not insuring these surgeries anymore, which would put an end to it quite quickly. Actually, I think it
yes,
probably
it would. But unfortunately, in the US, the mandates for Obamacare have included a lot of gender affirming surgery in them, and a lot of state laws also include it. So at that point, it becomes the taxpayer's problem, which I'm sorry to say is part of the reason it's happening, because people have outsourced the decision making. I mean, if anyone actually seriously thought that they personally would be liable for doing what they must know if they've done many of these surgeries is not a very effective surgery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then they wouldn't do it.
So this whole story does fill my heart with a bit of hate. I will confess that to you. I try to tamp it down because we got to work our way through it. But the damage is being done in an equation with the pushing of this by, as I said earlier, all of our institutions, and how people like you and others who are trying to push back are demonized and deplatformed, et cetera, it makes me crazy. And then I'm old enough to know, I was part of the early women's rights movement about fair pay and all that kind of stuff. And wow, we lose that in an instant, don't we? When the men start stamping their feet and saying they want our wigs, I mean, it just doesn't matter. And, where is the line in sexual assault? I had the unfortunate experience of sitting in a park by the Rideau Canal in Ottawa and looking over my shoulder. I was in a bathing suit on a blanket with a girlfriend, looking over my shoulder and seeing a man masturbating while staring at us in the bushes, right? Clearly sexual assault. How is that different than me having to face an autogynephile in my change room at the gym who's exposing himself to me, whether he's got an erection or not? It's the same feeling. I don't want to look at his junk. I need my own space. And we all agreed to that until about 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And anybody who challenges it, that poor woman in LA got I think she was attacked by Antifa for declaring what we held to be a sacred trust for most of our lives.
I want to unpick two things you said, if I may. And the first one is to return to the idea of the institutions. So what I was trying to say when I said that it's all or nothing on this, like either you think we really are two sexes, or you think what people say they are matters, and there's no in between. And unfortunately, institutions tended to accept without thinking we are who we say we are, because it sounded right. It sounded like the next liberal, nice thing to do after gay rights, et cetera, et cetera. And then once you've put that in the heart of your institution, you've put a lie in the heart of your institution. And it turns out, and we didn't know this until we ran a very large scale, uncontrolled experiment on this in the last 10 years. If you put a lie right at the heart of your institution, it breaks absolutely everything.
Yes. Because
what it does is it turns you through 180 degrees on whatever it is your institution is about. So, for example, suppose you're a free speech institution. You were set up to counter censorship, but you have put at your heart the idea that men can be women if they say they're women. Then you must try to silence people who say anything else.
Yes.
If you're about safeguarding, as many children's charities and institutions are meant to be primarily, before everything else, about child safeguarding, if you said that boys can be girls and men can be women, you can't keep children safe because you allow men into spaces where only women are meant to go, and so on and so forth. But anyway, I mean, I literally have examples right across the whole sphere of public endeavour. If you put a heart in the lie of your institution, you break and then reverse your actual core purpose. And unfortunately, people did that without realising. They didn't even fire a shot. They surrendered, allowed the lie in, not knowing what they were doing. And then it was too late. And then they turned around. It's as if you have a jinx that turns around your whole forces and gets them to start fighting in the opposite direction. They aren't even just putting down their weapons. They're fighting in the opposite direction. Yeah. So we have Stonewall, which was set up to protect, above all, gay children in schools, is now the main force in the UK that's fighting to sterilise those kids. It's not just homophobic. It's attempting to sterilise the kids it was set up to protect. So it's the worst possible thing. I've never seen anything like it. And then just to say something on the sexual assault point, because we never had any idea that people might not recognise who was a man and who was a woman, and that they might pretend that men could come into women's spaces because they were women. The way that laws on sexual assault are written, and I think this is true everywhere, but it's certainly true in any country I've ever looked at, is that there has to be intent. So if you accidentally flash your penis, because, you had a wardrobe malfunction and you're mortified about it and you do everything up again, that's not flashing. And so, unfortunately, because we have told these men that they really are women and that as women they're entitled, because they're the best and most amazing women, into all women's spaces, and any woman who complains must be kicked out on her arse, they're not intending to commit sexual assault. Of course, it feels like a sexual assault to all the women, because it's still a penis, isn't it? I mean, even if the man who has it thinks of it as some sort of lady junk, it's not. So now we've broken our sexual assault laws as well. Yeah, we have. And this is the final question, and then I will just ask you quickly what parents can do and how they should view this. But let me just say this, and this gives it away. If in fact this was all well-meaning psychiatric issues that could be dealt with this way, and there was no kind of malice on behalf of many, many people in this movement, they might say, women are uncomfortable. We're doing our best. Let's really lobby for a third change room, a third bathroom, because we're upsetting people. And we don't want to do that. We love our sisters, our cis sisters or whatever they're calling us. So we're going to go a different way. It is the demanding to behave in a certain way that we have evidence of and that we are testifying to is harmful for us that makes me feel cross with them and suspicious, in fact, of their actual motivations. Because if it was harmless, like I don't think Caitlyn Jenner is running around demanding to show her junk if she's still intact to women. And I don't get that vibe from her. I don't get it from her. But there's a whole bunch of people who do feel that way. And that is aggressive. I think, to use your word, it's narcissistic and it's damaging to us. And they don't care. So that is my problem presently with that. I agree. And it's because of the narcissism and it's because of the belief system at the heart of this. So I try not to think too much about people's motives because I can't know what's in a person's heart or mind. Yeah. What I can do is I can look at the impact on people upon material reality and also on laws. So that's the way that I manage to get up and be cheerful every day. I feel I'm doing good work in the face of an but in the face of an overwhelming tide. Overwhelming. And a tide that is catching up so many people and people that I care about, children, Yeah. So I don't just care about children, but you know what I mean? It's the one that really gets to me. Yeah, me too. So I just focus on the laws. Like we just have to go back to, our laws are there for a reason. They're meant to be based on reality. There really are two sexes. There really are female people and there really are male people. They're different. They need different things in certain circumstances. Not many, but certain important circumstances. And if we get back to that, then we can take the temperature right down and stop worrying about who's a good actor and who's a bad actor. Because there definitely are lots of bad actors, but I can't tell which ones they are. When we set up changing rooms for women that men aren't allowed into, we're not saying all men are rapists and all men are flashers. We're just saying some are, But also women want their own changing rooms for not bizarre reasons. So we just go back to the law and the rules and the practice. And then we can say, okay, there's some people who are not happy with their own bodies. How do we accommodate them? And this isn't what they want at all, but that is what we have to do.
Well, and they're denying women's reality that we are the less powerful physically of the two. And we do rationally fear some men. There are men who are bastards. We do. If I'm walking alone in a city at night and there's a shadow behind me and it's a guy, we all get that little fear. We do. And men don't necessarily get that the same way. We do because of a physical power imbalance. And we can't just ignore that is a reality. That's just a reality of our lives. So if they're forgetting about that too, then, I feel like we're really sunk. But because we're running out of time, I want to just ask you this because people ask me and I don't have a smart response. What do we do with children going to a camp that has embraced this? What do we do with our kids going back to school, especially in Canada where they're just immersed in this, like they're swimming around in toxic soup? What do you say? I mean, besides homeschool, what do you say?
Which isn't practicable for everybody. Yeah.
No.
I mean, there's an Irish joke, and because I'm Irish, I'm allowed to tell it, which is how do you get to such and such a place? Well, I wouldn't start from here. So if you are starting from here, meaning that your child is already coming home and telling you things they've learned online or in school, you're starting very late and it's going to be very hard for you. So I think every parent needs to become as informed about this as they possibly can up front. And then, we cannot fix this parent by parent and family by family. We actually have to stop teaching children lies in school. So I would say there's two things that each individual needs to do. And one of them is to fight against this at a system level. And, that means not wasting your time trying to persuade your friend in school or your sister or your daughter or whoever it is who disagrees with you on this. That's low impact, very high stress. Focus on institutions and in particular focus on schools. So find yourself a group of other parents who see things likewise and, take the heat right down, calm right down, get rid of all emotion from what you say and just start talking about facts. There are little boys and little girls. They're physically different. They have different needs. I'm afraid that what we're teaching the children is not accurate and so on. And this will not fix anything for your child and it will not fix anything quickly. But we have to do it because we cannot keep just trying to rescue children from this sewer that we've created one at a time. But if it's your own child, if it's your own child, I mean, there's a sewer. You can't just put your child on hold. You have to start talking early on in ways, and the most important thing is that your child knows deep in their heart that you are the person who cares most about them. Yeah. And that they can be honest with you and you are always honest with them. Because we all know that little children, they think that automatically pretty much, even when their parents let them down. But then they go into their teens and they're sort of primed to start thinking you're an idiot and to believe what they're told by their friends and so on and so forth. So you've got to store up good communication habits and strategies as early as you can so that when it comes to the teens, there's a chance they'll tell you. And then you have to learn a lot about communication skills. And there's a book coming out by Stella O'Malley, Sasha Ayad, and Lisa Marciano, 3 excellent therapists who write total good sense on gender, and they've got loads of strategies in it. But basically what it is when your child learns something that is not correct, you have to already have learned so much that you aren't confused by them, but you also have to just be a brilliant communicator. So your child says something like, I'm starting to question my gender. I don't actually feel like a girl. Like I think I might actually be non-binary because I don't feel like a girl. You don't go, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? Of course you're a girl. You love dresses or anything like that. You say, oh, that's interesting. What does it feel like? What do you mean? What does that mean to you? Tell me more. And what you're doing is you're signaling that you respect your child, that you respect their feelings. You're keeping it as low key and low temperature as you possibly can, because parents, we tend to fly off the handle when we think our children are in danger. Of course we do. But in this, that's not going to help because they've learned that means you're a transphobe. They've got a whole script online. Yeah. So you just have to keep going, oh, right, I see what you mean. Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, but it just doesn't seem to matter to me very much, because I always think that anyone can do whatever they like, and just try and make as light of it as you possibly can. And if you've always had great communication with your kid, and you've always been someone who truly models in your own life that there's nothing that only boys can do and nothing that only girls can do, and that you are not a bigoted person and so on, then you have some hope that they'll come to you early and that they'll talk to you about what they're going through. And I know parents who've done this, and I mean, it's not easy. And even fantastic families, very happy, strong relationships, they can still end up caught in this. So this is not me saying it only happens to people who parent badly. And I know people whose kids have gone through this and come out the other side, and it's very traumatizing.
Oh, I can't.
But the thing
imagine.
that has helped is the moment that the parents have managed to, in this low-key, evidence-based, transparent way, convince their kids that they, the parents, are on the kids' side, and the people who are trying to tell them lies about bodies and trans identities and so on are not on their side. So I'll give you a concrete example. A woman I know whose daughter said that she was non-binary to the school, and then said she was a trans boy, and the school just took this, it was granted, changed her pronouns, informed the parents because they'd had a fight with another family about not informing parents. Just a ridiculous email. I saw the email. It was like, congratulations, your daughter is now a boy type thing, And this girl has a great relationship with her family and her siblings and her parents and so on. And they talked through it, and she said she wanted to get a breast binder. And the mum looked into the research and came to the conclusion that these were not healthy. And because they had really good communication channels, she was able to go to her daughter and say, look, I think these things are dangerous. I think it's going to damage your breast tissue as you grow up. Why don't we go shopping together, get you a new wardrobe, get you a fantastic haircut that makes you feel that it's really you, and we'll get you some really well-fitting sports bras that really minimize you, and make you feel better.
I love that.
And we'll dress you to hide it, but we're not going to go the breast binder route. And her daughter, because her daughter really trusted her, listened to her, and then went and looked at the evidence, and then came back to her and said, but why are the lobby groups telling me that breast binders are okay? And that was this chink in the wall of, believing that parents are transphobes and that trans is all gorgeous, was the bit where she realised that these lobby groups did not have her best interests at heart. And they were able to work from that outwards.
That is
gradually.
That's such good advice. And, I know you're right, because when I was single parenting a teenage boy, two teenage boys, I read a book that said the best thing you can do is have the family supplant a dysfunctional peer group, right?
Yeah. And it's not easy. My God, they're primed to listen to their peers and not you.
Absolutely.
But, if you've always been somebody, like I always said to my boys when they were little, if anyone ever says to you, don't tell your parents, I swear to you, that person does not have your best interests at heart.
1,000%. So true. Well, you know what I might do? I might have you back in a few months and have, when we go to video, and have some parents on, and maybe the women writing this book as well.
But I also think, I think you should talk to them. I will send you, and you can put in the show notes for this, the details of the book, which is already available for pre-order.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. I have actually seen the draft because I blurbed it for them.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Brilliant.
I'll promote it like mad then.
Yeah.
Listen, I love these. I could always do like 5 hours with you, but thank you very much, because you
always
ask
such good questions.
Well, thank you. But you've thought about the stuff that's tormenting me, so I don't always kind of feel like I'm so alone. So thank you very, very much for doing this, and keep on going. You're a very brave lady, and I'm grateful that you exist.
Well, thank you too.
Yes, thank you. Bye, Helen.
Bye.
Bye. That was Helen Joyce, the amazing campaigner who has been cobbling together the facts, the data, the history that we all need to hear to explain how we ended up in trans crazy land. And I don't mean any harm to anybody who's actually suffering. I do not mean that. But what is going on right now is illogical and dangerous. What's been happening in the news around Maui is really interesting. 2 stories have emerged. One, that the person in charge of water on the island of Maui, which is where Lahaina, that burned to the ground, is located, is said to, and this has been reported by credible reporters, withheld water to put the fire out because of some wokey water is our sacred blah blah reason. I mean, just a ridiculous reason. And we will see if anybody is going to be able to track back that the multitude of deaths on the island were connected to that. We'll see. And I'll be asking Darius about that. And the other thing is that the sirens did not go off, and the person who could have made them go off said he had a good reason for it. But somebody in the chain of command resigned yesterday. So this is another case of very, very bad handling. Was this caused by down power lines, as some are saying? And then, of course, on the fringe of this, and I hate to say that, but there are many people, many people, some are the same suspects who are saying, oh, it was caused by this, distant energy weapon or whatever they're called. And you can see, let's eliminate the rational stuff first, and then we can talk about that. It doesn't make any sense to me, because if rich people really wanted to burn down Lahaina so they could buy the property, they could probably find a better way than that, especially charring the ground and killing people. My suspicion is that, like everything else right now that's gone wrong, a lot of it, yes, there is the WEF and Klaus Schwab, and I believe that too. But a lot of what goes wrong is that they don't care about us, and therefore they run all of the institutions incompetently. That is a more likely story to me. So we're going to hear from Darius Hurst about that. He's with the Maui Times newspaper, and here's my interview with him. I guess I'll start by saying aloha, Darius. How are you doing?
We're getting by. I can't say that this has been an easy time, but we are coming together as a community to do everything that is needed for all of Maui.
Yeah. Tell me about Lahaina, or what's left of Lahaina, one of my favorite places in the world.
Well, there's not much left. That's really the hard part to grapple with right now, is that all the places that we know and love are gone. There's a few little spots here and there, a few bright spots, a few churches that are still standing, but for the most part, it's completely devastated. It's literally reduced to ash and rubble.
Have you been over there, Darius?
We have not been able to get over up until just a few days ago.
Wow.
We have boots on the ground up north in Kaanapali, Napili, where a lot of the relief effort is happening up there. But as far as getting into Lahaina proper, no, that access has been denied to almost everybody for, appropriate reasons. So,
you think so? Do you think so? It was.
Yes and no. I definitely believe that they are doing what they need to do there. I believe that we need to be staying out of the way to allow the government agencies to do what they need to do there. We don't want to hinder the process of finding victims, and we don't want to be in there trampling on the ground that they need to work on. But at the same time, I believe that it's part of the ability for us to heal as a community is to get access to these places and these people and these stories.
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because it feels almost surreal, because it's still, for those of us, on the mainland who are following it, we see the pictures of this kind of raised city. It does look like it looks like Hiroshima. Let's be honest. That's kind of what it reminds me of. And yet we're not seeing names and faces particular, it feels kind of not finished or unreal in some sense, because the human element of it has not been fully realized yet, I think.
Yeah. It's really difficult to kind of put it into perspective. The latest numbers that have come out are 111 confirmed dead. The reports that we're seeing is that most of those are either elderly or young, which is really, really tragic. They say that there's still 1,300 people missing, and that they've searched 60% of the disaster area that was directly impacted by the fire. If you quickly crunch those numbers, things don't add up. And that's really the concerning part, is that, 100 dead, 1,300 missing, 60%, there's going to be a lot more casualties coming through. And we're all still trying to figure it out and deal with it. I don't know if it's a misinformation as much as it's really, really hard to go through and do this. A lot of the responders that are there on the ground doing this hard work, they are from Lahaina. So it's even more difficult for them to go through and do what they do, because they've got emotional ties and emotional loss that's going along with that work.
And I wonder also, not to be gruesome, but is it possible that the fires burn so hot for so long that there aren't actually remains even to be recovered? I mean, is that what's in the cards now, do you think, or no?
It's difficult to say without being there directly on the ground. And we're still figuring out and getting a lot of information about the fire, how quick it moved, the temperatures, things like that. But early reports are saying that this fire moved about a mile a minute. If you put that into perspective of, let's say, a high-end runner that's trained, they run a 4-minute mile. So if a fire is moving a mile a minute, there's really no chance to get out. As far as the devastation that is there, I've read reports that says that it was hot enough to melt metal. So you probably are correct in some way, shape, and form as far as what that actually looks like.
Yeah. So let's get into some of the things that have happened the last few days. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you folks, and thank you again for doing this. There was a resignation yesterday or the day before by one of the people in charge is this the fellow who didn't set off the sirens? What was the point of this resignation, as far as you understand?
You're talking about Herman and Daya. And yes, he was the Maui County's Emergency Management Agency administrator. Reporters here in a press conference 2 days ago really kind of grilled him, and people are not satisfied with the answers that they got. There's a lot of information that is passed through the websites for the management agency, the emergency management agency, that state that these alarms were supposed to be used for multiple purposes. Being here as a local, when I hear those sirens, yes, he was correct in the fact that if I hear those sirens, I'm thinking about tsunami and getting up country. But when these fires came through, power was down even earlier in the day. So there was no television. Cell phone service was spotty at best going through that area because of, especially when the fire started coming through, I believe that transmission lines, power lines, cell phone towers were impacted immediately. So when they put out their emergency releases to cell phones and television, a lot of people there didn't have that service. I have a good friend who was actually working up there on the west side. He lives central, and he was on his way home from work. He was on the parkway where the fire actually started coming down. And because he was up on the hill, he did immediately get that cell phone notification as he was driving down the parkway and had to stop because the fire was coming down the hill. But that literally was 1 minute before the fire kind of pushed into Lahaina. So I would say that there should have been some kind of advanced warning. I believe that they should have utilized all assets, and his answers prior to resigning were really kind of suspect. He said that he didn't regret not sounding those sirens. Unfortunately, he was not here on island when everything happened. He was on Oahu at a conference there. Wow. So he wasn't physically here. And I think that a lack of communication may have happened throughout this whole process.
You know, what's interesting about that, Darius, is that a normal person is going to say, yeah, I do feel guilty, even if he's actually not guilty. Like, don't you just feel guilty that you could have done more? You didn't do it. It's weird to say, what he said in a sense. It sounds, I don't know. People in positions of power should feel guilty about everything that happens on their watch, whether it's their fault or not.
I can't imagine the emotional toll of what he is going through.
Yeah.
I mean, he's here, he's on the ground, he's been vetted and put into a situation where he's there to help, but at the same time, he wasn't able to do that. And so for me, I look at it and I have empathy towards the situation, but we also really need to be asking these hard questions and figuring out what happened. Not only for people here to kind of understand what happened and start to get some semblance of that and healing, but also for the future. These types of things aren't going to go away, not here in Hawaii and not on the mainland, on the West Coast where fires run rampant. We need to understand what happened, and we need to understand ways that we can be better in order to respond immediately to these types of disasters.
So I guess the other thing I want to say, just while we're on the subject of people, being talked about, and I sorry I didn't write down his name, but he is a water official who apparently, I don't know if this is true, did not want to release water to fight the fire because he had some view that it should or shouldn't be used that way. I don't want to say it falsely. So tell me that story.
I have not seen that report, so I cannot speak to whether water was released or not. What I can speak to is the fact that there were firefighters on the ground in Lahaina trying to fight these fires. And the first account of this from firefighters who are here, they live here, this is their home. They were there trying to fight these fires and save these buildings and these homes and these families. And when they started hooking up to fire hydrants, what they quickly realized is that the water pressure was dramatically dropping as they went. They went fire hydrant to fire hydrant to fire hydrant, hooking up and trying to get access to water to fight these fires in any way, shape, or form that they could. And the further they went, the less water there was. So that is what happened from a firefighting perspective. And
how do you account for that, Darius? Is there a hypothesis about why that would have happened?
I think that as the fire came down the hill, it starts burning buildings and like we said, it was hot, melting metal, leaving open lines so that these systems that were interconnected couldn't pressurize the way that they normally would. So I think that there was open ends in some of the early destruction that really compounded the issue of water being available for the firefighters to do their job.
Yeah. And then I'll ask you, there's one story that's going around, which is irrational, but I'm sure you've heard it. And I think that rather than expecting in any way that it's true, it does speak to a kind of, what's the right word? A kind of inability to even take on how serious this event was, right? It was so weird to watch it and see the city kind of encircled by fire. But people are saying, oh, this was over a land grab and that there were these direct energy weapons being fired at Lahaina. Let's just deal with that because it is on the net. And let's put that one to bed.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of misinformation happening. Let's really be honest. Social media is a place where people can, and the internet as a whole, can give their opinions and what they think, and it, for some reason, is considered truth. So we got to really be careful about what we're hearing and what we're listening to and what we're saying. What's happening here on the ground is tragic. And there have been firsthand reports that this business is gone or that this place blew up and that this gas station is open and water's available here. And it really is not all true. So we need to be listening to our leaders because they are doing a good job of getting information out. But we also need to be listening to the local people, not only because here in Hawaii, we come together as a community a little more readily than other places do. It's just the spirit of aloha. It's what we do. So the first response came from locals helping locals. And unless you're on the ground and you have your thumb on the pulse of what's happening and why it's happening, you shouldn't be saying, this is what happened. You shouldn't be saying that the fire started this way. They will do reviews. They will get to the bottom of it. But to speak to something that isn't true right now is only hurting our local community.
What do you think? What is the best guess? I read somewhere that there was some credible discussion around the fact that these might have been downed power lines from some kind of aging infrastructure. Do you know anything about that?
I've seen video. Essentially what happened is that there was a fire earlier in the day, probably around 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Firefighters quickly were on scene and extinguished that fire. But the winds were so heavy that power lines were being downed. I've seen video of people right at the beginning of that fire, the early one, where power lines were down and sparking and causing brush fires. So that did happen. Whether that's the immediate or the overall cause, it hasn't been confirmed yet. Speculation is that is what it is. There were literally 70, 80 mile an hour winds. This hurricane was 700 miles south of us. I have been here on Maui through at least 5 or 6 different hurricane encounters in my time here, and I have never seen winds like this.
Wow.
Even with hurricanes that were directly over our islands. It was unprecedented what these winds were doing. Down trees, I've seen down power lines, even up country. And I think that as the fire ran through, that it only created more of that kind of problem with down power lines. So I can't speak to the exact cause of the fire, but as more time goes by, it's looking like power lines played a significant role.
Now, I want to ask you something, because twice you have said in the interview that you kind of trust what your leaders are doing. That's a very interesting viewpoint for a journalist. And I'm just wondering if is that something kind of inherent to Maui, or is it, you don't seem terribly suspicious of how they're running it. And I'm just wondering, if is that a local way of looking at things, or
no? And let me correct that real quick. When I say that we need to listen to our leaders, I believe that that's what leaders are for, is to be able to kind of help organize. We need to listen to what they're saying because they give us information.
Yeah.
As far as the local sentiment, no. There's a big, huge trust issue right now. People up in Lahaina, in Ka'anapali, Napili, the people that are directly impacted are angry. They want answers, and we're not getting them. Yeah. So that is a big problem. I believe that that's part of the resignation of our emergency management professional. I believe that the relief effort that should have been there immediately wasn't there. It takes time to organize these relief efforts on a massive level. So what happened is that the local community came together and started bringing in boatloads by boat because there was no road access. All the roads were shut down. Wow. There's literally one road in and one road out. There is a second one that's a little more treacherous, but the local community came together and started bringing in supplies immediately from here on Maui or even other islands. Molokai sent boats over and over and over. And so a lot of the relief effort, especially in the first 5 to 7 days, was all done via local people supporting local people. And it's tragic. And I think that there's a lot of anger that it's coming from that, because we expect our local government and our state government and our federal government to get here and give relief now. We need it now, not a week from now. So yes, we're angry. Yes, we want answers. And I don't think we're getting those. Do I think that we need to listen? Yes. I think everybody should be heard. But access has been a really, really big problem.
Yes, I think and is she your managing editor that dropped either the TikTok or the clip on Twitter a few days ago, and she seemed really pissed off about not getting access. Of course, any reporter is going to feel that way, right? You want to see for yourself, don't you? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, access is really a big deal. I mean, they shut down the roads immediately. So no one in, no one out. And then all of a sudden we see national and international media there on the ground, reporting on the nightly news, all the networks. But the local publications, the local news was not having access. We could not get in. We were being turned away. We reached out to the PIO for Maui County, the PIO for the state of Hawaii, and literally for over a week got no responses.
Wow.
Sent emails, no response. Called phone numbers to voicemails that were full, sent text messages. So the lack of communication is troubling, to say the least. And Ashley, in her frustration, put that out because it's true. We have been here for 25 years. Maui Times is known and loved for the most part throughout this community. And for us to not be able to get boots on the ground or get any real-time information to the people that actually need it is very disconcerting.
You guys should have been the first ones in my view.
We didn't have a chance. Like, we literally tried to go.
No, I mean, they should have let you in. They should have let you. You should have been the first ones let in, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, and as far as the national media being there, I'm hearing reports now that they just got in. They hopped a boat, or they somehow were able to get in through alternative means. What we're trying to do is actually go in with the proper channels. We don't want to force our way in. But what we do want to do is help our community get the things that we need. And the only way to do that is to be able to be there, up there, while things are going down, so that we can get the proper information to the people in a timely manner. What was happening is that reports were coming out of a water drop here, or gas available here, or food available here. And by the time that message hits and people are actually able to get it, it's 24 hours too late.
Yeah, that's no good. That's not good. Let me ask you this. Where are you? I might be a little mad that the president is not really, until yesterday, talked about this in a significant way. And I might also say lots of money for Ukraine. What about Lahaina? And I'm wondering if you're having any of those thoughts as well.
We're really kind of confused right now. I can't speak to what the president has done or has not done. They are going to be here, him and his wife, the first lady, on Monday.
Yep.
You're going to be able to survey and look, but I think that the response overall has been lacking. Let's be really honest. They're just now starting to mobilize full relief into there. They're starting to move emergency management resources up into Lahaina. It's all been coordinated out of central Maui. So here we are 10 days in, and the relief is just starting to really pour in there. So that is the frustrating part, is that we needed it then. We still need it now, and we're going to need it in the future. So thankfully it's starting to happen, but I believe that we need to ask why this wasn't mobilized immediately. And I believe that that's a question that our higher up government needs to be held accountable for.
Absolutely. Some serious butt kicking. Darius, do you know anybody who's missing in Lahaina? Do you have any of those connections that you're struggling with yourself, or no?
All of our immediate ohana in our journalism family has been accounted for.
Ohana meaning family, is that right? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if I say family, that's my family, my wife, my kids, my parents. But, here in Hawaii, you have extended ohana. I consider my employees, our reporters, our editors, our journalists, our freelancers, they're all family too. So ohana is a big extended family. That being said, there have been direct impacts. We have friends that still have fires burning in their backyards, hot spots that are popping up 10 days later. I saw a report this morning of another flare up just a mile from my house, a mile and a half from my house. So things are still happening. But yes, I believe at this point that almost everyone here on Maui, it's a small, tight-knit community, even outside of Lahaina. Everybody knows everybody, or in one way, shape, or form knows somebody that has been directly impacted. So we are grieving, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. I believe that the worst is still to come, and we just need to be able to be here to support each other as much as possible through this
You mean
time.
as they find the missing? Is that what you mean by the worst?
Well, yeah, and then the loss of homes and the loss of a school. And they had to postpone school island-wide to deal with this. They're relocating children from schools up in Lahaina to other schools. I mean, the impact of this isn't just the fire and the homes and the immediate loss. It's going to be a lot more forward-looking than that. People are going to need a lot of help and a lot of support. And the things that are going to happen here in the next few weeks, a lot of them are unforeseen. The challenges that we're going to have, we don't know what those are yet.
Yeah. You got some famous surfers coming in, I think, right? Or are they not?
You're probably referencing Kai Lenny, and he is local here. He definitely has his thumb on the pulse of the local sentiment. So if you've seen those interviews and the frustration that's coming from him, that is directly correlated with the local community and the lack of response that is coming in. I mean, they literally are taking in boats and jet skis with relief efforts from local people. And so, yes, those reports are true.
So last question, because I know you're busy, but and I'm really grateful you took time. So the island, I know it has a huge surfing culture there, but it's primarily tourism, is it not? And without Lahaina, can it still be in the near future a tourist place in order to keep the economy going? Or does this mean the end for a significant period of time, do you think? Like, will the airport work? Are there enough hotels still up? Can they, can it generate money for the economy, do you think?
Look, it's really important for tourism to be here. It's a very large portion of our economy. And as much as we don't like that, I believe that it is the most important thing that can happen right now. Maui is open. Lahaina is closed. There are amazing places to come and stay here on Maui, and we need it. South Maui has some of the most amazing beaches in the world. Paia is a great surf culture town that has its own unique flair. Upcountry has its own personality. There's places to go back Hana side. Yes, we need tourism. We want people to be here. I can't say that life is getting back to normal right now in those areas, but it is still better than Lahaina proper. So we are encouraging people to come and to enjoy what we have here. But we are asking for them to be respectful when they do that, to understand that what we're going through and the pain that the local people are going through, and to understand that we still need to heal. But for some people to say that Maui is closed, that only exacerbates the overall problem that is going to be seen here. We have a lot of amazing people and businesses that are in the unaffected areas that are going to need tourism help and support. And for some people out there, not going to name names, to say that Maui is closed, they're not here right now. Their intentions are good, but if tourism completely falls apart and goes away, the impacts to other people on this island and other areas are really going to be dramatic.
Yeah, that's as I thought. Well, listen, Darius, good luck to you. And I'm going to try this out and say, I think it's mahalo nui loa. Is that right?
Mahalo nui loa.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darius. Good luck to you all.
Mahalo. Thank you for the time.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye-bye. So that was Darius Hurst of the Maui Times newspaper. And I just want to switch it up a little bit before we say goodbye, because something interesting happened this week. Pierre Poilievre took on a journalist who asked him one of those, when did you stop beating your wife? Terrible, terrible questions that legacy media uses against conservative politicians. And it was something like, why do you use a dog whistle or something, blah. It was like a stupid, bogus, ridiculous question. And I must say, Pierre Poilievre was quite good. He said, well, who said it's a dog whistle? Cite your source. And she couldn't. And that went back and forth. It was very Ron DeSantis type of way of taking on the media. Challenge them, ask them to prove the assertions they're making. And finally she said, well, experts. And he said, name the experts. And of course she couldn't. I mean, this is what kind of a question is that? Nobody's dog whistling anything, you absolute fool. Embarrassing. So a similar thing happened to Vivek Ramaswamy, who I have fallen madly in love with. He is the smartest guy around these days. And he was in a similar situation with Neil Cavuto, who, in my view, is, let's just say he's not that bright and he's on the wrong side of history every time. But he thought he was going to get Vivek Ramaswamy on hard questions about Trump. He wanted to put him in an untenable position. And so we have this great clip from that exchange. And I want you to listen to it because it's why Vivek and all politicians who are not part of the mainstream narrative, and Neil Cavuto is mainstream narrative, this guy, how they should handle trying to be pushed into saying something stupid. And I think Canadian politicians should listen. I think all politicians should listen to this. It is an absolute masterclass in batting away the kind of absurd baiting that goes on within legacy media newsrooms trying to, entrap people. It's not an interview. They were trying to entrap him. So anyway, here goes Neil Cavuto and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Those Republicans will be on that debate stage is Vivek Ramaswamy. He is kind enough to join us right now. Vivek, good to have you back.
It's good to see you.
Let me ask you a little bit about these Georgia indictments against the former president. You call them political persecutions. Explain.
Look, Neil, I can't think we look at these indictments without the context of 3 other separate indictments, several of which came in the last 4 months alone. These are 4 different indictments in the middle of an election. I think it sets an awful precedent in our country for the ruling party, the party in power, to use police force to indict its political opponents in the middle of an election. And I say this as somebody who now in some of the recent polls, I'm polling it second in this race, 3rd overall. It would be a lot easier for me if Donald Trump were eliminated from competition, but that is not how I want to win. The way we win elections in this country, at least the way it should be, is that we convince the voters of this country of our vision and what we stand for. And that's why I've said that I would pardon, at least for the federal crimes, I would pardon Donald Trump to help move this nation forward. I am focused, for example, on your economic message. That's what we actually need to be talking more about, less about these politicized indictments that have distracted us from the fundamental issue. That's the fault of the Biden DOJ and a lot of the Democrat prosecutors across this country. Instead of explaining why Bidenomics is actually a farce, it is a failure. With actual more job openings in this country than there are people looking for work. Price increases that are indeed permanent when wages have not gone up over the same period. That is how we're going to win this election in a landslide. That's what I want us talking about. But I will be unabashed about standing on the side of principle when I say, yes, these prosecutions are wrong.
But I can understand that. But there are 91 criminal charges in all, Vivek, as you're aware, over 4 criminal cases. They can't all be politicized, can they? I mean, there's something that the former president must have done in any one of these that struck you as wrong, if not illegal.
I think, Neil, just because the government has brought a case, if we're going to be a culture that now starts to say there must be something wrong if the government has charged 91 counts, I think that's a people of sheep. And when the people behave like sheep, that breeds a government of wolves.
Well, you don't think
that's
there's
the reality. And so, no, I am skeptical.
Vivek, you don't think there's anything in this case that shows or even strongly hints of the former president trying to reverse that Georgia contest?
Neil, you know, I've had this conversation before. There's a difference between a bad judgment and an illegal act. And I view this indictment in the context of, as you put it, 3 other independent indictments. The first one beginning in New York for a novel election and campaign contribution theory, to one that has a novel theory of interpreting the Presidential Records Act, to a novel theory of attorney-client relationships. When you have a series of novel legal theories that are used to indict a prior U.S. president and a sitting candidate in the middle of an election, I just don't think that's good for the country. I'm in this to lead our nation forward, not to be a political commentator or legal analyst on a series of legal cases. But what I will say as a candidate in this race is that I do not think it is good for our country to set this precedent.
No,
My focus,
understand
Neil,
that,
is on reuniting this country, on leading us forward.
Vivek,
and that's going to make my job more difficult.
I understand. But when you have the Republican governor of Georgia who has said this report is irrefutable and that this was an attempt at voter fraud that was scorching. And you have others who've taken similar views, including the Secretary of State, they're a Republican, who said that Donald Trump went too far. Wouldn't you put your trust, or at least your instincts, in those guys, Republicans, who said that this has been well examined, aggressively examined, and there was nothing to it?
Neil, I have one question in my mind. I'm running to be our next president. I ask, what is in the interest of this nation? Do I believe that these prosecutors or these elected officials or these federal prosecutors are advancing the interests of this nation when they're bringing this unprecedented indictment, not one time, but now 4 times over? No, I think our country is worse off because of this politicization. Would I have made different decisions than Donald Trump did? Absolutely, I would have. I will remind you that I'm running for U.S. president in the same race that he is. Sure. But I think it is so important. This conversation that you and I are having are evidence enough of why this is a bad idea, because we're not talking about how we improve an economy. We're not talking about how we ought to revive our national identity.
This is a big deal.
And that's what this election really should be about.
But this is a big deal. We can't sort of minimize it or slough it aside because it looks like a cabal. So let me ask you, when you talk about wanting to pardon Donald Trump for this, why? What would be good about that if you became president of the United States to pardon him?
I think the right answer for this country is to move forward, not to get into a weaponized tug of war between 2 political parties that then make a habit of using politicized police force against their political opponents. That is the stuff of banana republics. That is not what I want to see the United States of America devolve into. We should be able to disagree fiercely with one another, but still sort out those disagreements through our civic process, culminating at the ballot box. Well, every person's voice and vote counts equally. That is how we do things in the United States, not by eliminating our opponents using backdoor mechanisms. And so my chief reason for pardoning Donald Trump, at least of the federal offenses, which will be what's in my power, that includes the New York State offenses because they include the charge of an underlying federal offense as well. It will be to move this nation forward, because my motivation in being U.S. president, Neil, is that I don't want to lead us to a national divorce. We're skating on thin ice as a country right now. That is a fact. I want to lead us to a national revival. That will take forward. That is also why I'm saying even now, when it would be in my self-interest as a candidate to see Donald Trump eliminated. By some counts, that would put me at number 1 in the Republican primary polls. That is not how I want to see it done, which is why I've been so particular about being vocal on this, because I stand on the side of principle over partisan politics.
All right. You also spoke recently about the idea of seeking out Donald Trump as someone you would use as an advisor. What did you mean by that?
Well, I was asked about the cabinet members I would choose. Who would I choose? Other rivals of mine in the Republican primary field? The answer is I think several of them could be good cabinet members. And then I brought up Donald Trump because I don't think that he would serve in my cabinet, but the role I'd want to see him play is to, yes, be an advisor on understanding where he might have fallen short if he were to do it again on shutting down the administrative state. because that's the top of my domestic policy agenda. Shut down that administrative bureaucracy. Shut down the deep state. Reduce the federal employee headcount by over 75%. Turns out I've read the law, Neil. Civil service protections, they don't apply to mass layoffs. And mass layoffs are absolutely what I am bringing to the D.C. bureaucracy. But I would like to not have to learn those lessons all over again, but to build on where President Trump left off with the America First agenda. I'm in this race to take that America First agenda to the next level. And yes, in a way that unites this country. And I will take everybody's help, including Trump's help, in making me successful in that role.
All right, we'll follow it closely. Vivek, very good seeing you again. Thank you very much. Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate, he will make that debate stage next week for that big debate. We have a lot more coming up, including the latest on those catastrophic wildfires.
So that was Vivek Ramaswamy just kind of showing how it's done. You don't have to be afraid when you are right, and he is an absolute master of that. I am just sitting here watching the fires in Kelowna, and my heart's breaking. These are my people. Northwest Territories, Yellowknife 2. What a nightmare. What's going on? We got to figure it out, folks. We absolutely have to figure it out. And we have to do it clear-headedly, and the blame must go where the blame should go. And we don't know that yet, but let's keep looking for some answers here. And I will also say this to you. I am going away for 9 days. It's our annual trip to the cottage, which is a big, big part of our family life right now. I can hardly wait. Down on Lake Erie in a magnificent place we've rented this year. I'm so happy about it. Taking the rescue pup for her first little chance at a beach, and we'll see how she does. But what does that mean for the show? Nothing. It means you're going to get your shows every Friday still. We've recorded some in advance to meet that need. The Substack may fall off a little bit. I'm going to try to find a way to get the shows posted there to keep the conversation going. That's really, really important. But I probably won't write any separate pieces while I'm away. I'm really trying to chill out. Gotta chill out. But you'll be getting shows. I hope you like what we do. And I will be thinking of all of you while I'm on holiday, especially the ones who've been really kind during the ups and downs of doing this podcast over 3 years. Wow, what a ride, right? I started it in May of 2020, thinking that the COVID craziness would just end. They'd realize their mistake eventually if we just talked about it enough. But wow, they haven't acknowledged it. They won't admit it. They are ramping up to do it again. And we just got to keep on going, don't we? Collectively. And with admiration and respect for the people, not that there's a lot of Johnny-come-latelys right now. That's good. We're happy to have you on board. But there were people, and you know who they were, Jay Bhattacharya and Kaldorf and Sunetra Gupta and many, many, many more, Scott Atlas, who stuck their necks out and in some cases nearly destroyed their career and had to have FBI watching over them. So, you know, there were people who were very, very brave, and we must always remember them because it'll make us feel happy about the world we live in, even though it seems like we're in the fourth ring of hell right now, doesn't it? It really, like, literally fire and trans craziness and all kinds of other bad stuff. But I'll be back in a couple weeks with a new attitude, I hope, and maybe a little bit of a suntan and a happy dog and happy grown children and a happy husband, I hope. And I'm going to take some photographs too so you can see the lake and get a sense of how wonderful it is down there. Anyway, stay critical. I'll see you soon.